about Muslims marrying Hindus. I don't have the quotes here, exact quotes, but I'm paraphrasing. He goes, at one point of our history, meaning South Asian Islamic history, they were always polytheists. We just saw them as polytheists, and we dismissed them. And we had everything. We had the final revelation. There are other parts of our history that says they are not polytheists. They believe in one God, and they have many different understandings of this one God. And then we can marry them. And other parts of history that says that their tradition is extremely important, if not more important than Islam. And there's some scholars. My point is that in my conversations, he is aware of all these different interpretations, and his answer is those interpretations. So he doesn't tell me what is the interpretation. His own personal interpretation, his is that Hindus are God's creatures, and of course, these are the various interpretations, and he leaves it very clear, or unclear what to do about that particular subject. I asked him what about the situation within South Asia, Kashmir, Afghanistan, Karachi, the Naxalite, Nepal, Sri Lanka, civil war in Sri Lanka, and so forth. I'm very interested in his particular perspective on war. And the only way he can understand war is within the Islamic framework of just war theory. The only way he can understand is when do you engage, when you don't engage, who at what point you can and who cannot, who are combatants and who are not combatants. Which is not something new, and I hope it's not new when you talk to a theologian and if he's only going to talk within theology, that's common sense. But my only point is that I think he is aware that there are other things he can talk about, think about conflict outside of the trained theology he learned in Deoband school. Here, which is most interesting, is I think he's professing what I call a more pluralistic interpretation of what is traditionally out there in terms of engagement with war. One of the things he emphasized more and more, at least in his sermons, is that there's a peaceful, not only the peaceful nature of Islam, identifying values of peace building, identifying unity, identifying the love for the Creator and divine, but more and more he's emphasizing the accountability of all our actions and thoughts. And within this, he's saying, if we're accountable for those actions and thoughts, then believers will be more righteous, will have more passion in dealings with their fellow beings. Love, kindness, affection, forgiveness and mercy would be a virtue of a true faithful Muslim. And in this, that one doesn't have to emphasize, but it will come out. For example, if justice, adl, and wisdom and compassion are all values, peace-building values, as I pressed them, he said those things will come when correct thinking and correct intentions are aligned. He says it's important to remember that our tradition, Islamic tradition, ultimately emphasizes social justice, ultimately emphasizes equality of all humankind, ultimately wants us to submit to divine will, but to submit by recognizing that these barriers need to be overcome, barriers of inequality need to be overcome. Submission means to be fair, to be honest, to do your zakat and prayers and remember God. And he quotes different verses, chapter 5, verse 8, 57, number 25, and so forth, where social justice is synonymous in the act of the cause of doing good for God. That it's not just something of a nice virtue or an ethical principle, but he said it's a Muslim's duty to work for justice, reject oppression, reject injustices on the interpersonal and structural levels. It's the duty from Quranic verses, those verses I pointed to do it and to be responsible for social justice. And what does he mean by this? And I've asked him and impressed him, what do you mean it's a duty? So it's a duty is just as much as the duty as doing the 5 prayers, fasting in Ramadan. He says the same. It's very interesting how he sort of interpreted and put it in as maybe the sixth pillar or so forth. But he didn't say it. It's my interpretation. Don't quote me on that. It's not the sixth pillar. But he would say that you can't be a Muslim without realizing these particular duties. So the link of peace building and justice is never far from the surface of being a Muslim, he would say. Justice and peace are interconnected and interdependent, is a statement that he said all the time. As peace is a product of order and justice, the pursuit of justice is part of striving for peace, an obligation for both the ruling elites, those who get privileged to be ruling elites, and for the masses who are running day-to-day lives. He says what's most important is the natural obligation to recognize our common humanity. Furthermore, the pursuit of justice is a consistent message to resist and correct conditions of injustice, which can be accomplished through these conditions. Activism, to be active in some sort of group, third-party mediation, or some sort of intervention. My last few minutes. I would emphasize one last thing that the Grand Mufti's mentioned. He says, as a religion, we always think institutionally, but we forget the personal. The only reason Islam is here today, as the Grand Mufti of Pakistan says, is not because of some massive institutions, massive economies, or massive empires falling. It's because of the daily struggles of the day-to-day person, of the first generation Muslims, being kind to the poor, understanding the essence of equality, and understanding that core religious values, understand through the Hadith and Qur'an, is doing good. One should do good, ihsan, and which for him, he understood ihsan to mean graceful. And I said, what about kindness and beneficence? He said, graceful. Thank you. And he says, in order to be graceful, it's the only way to think about one being a mu'min, a genuine, faithful believer. And he constantly quoted Sirat al-Mustaqim from the Quran. What I want to say is here, within a conflict resolution perspective, these gentlemen who've been trained in religious theology and seminaries are really, I think, pressed to think about peace building, conflict resolution, and conflict management in ways I don't think their own training allowed them to do. There are no such courses taught in any of these schools that they teach in. There's no courses on pluralism and diversity. There's no courses on conflict management. There's no courses on mediation, facilitation in madrasas and jama'ah. But there is this sense that I think because of where their communities are and where the world is, that the only way to be a Muslim is to think about duties and returning to most basic, essential interpretations of the Quran, which is how to work against zulm, the injustices, and how to be faithful to one's own tradition and to be responsible for all, what is, as I said before, all thoughts and all intentions. Thank you for your time.
Let me add my congratulations to what you've said. Look, it's very telling, the third set of interviews you had with the Grand Mufti. No, what was he, sorry? Benori Town. Look, on one side he quotes the importance of justice, and yet through his silence, inaction, I don't know what exactly, he seems to condone the actions which are taken to pursue, or in the pursuit of justice. And this dichotomy seems to come through all what you're saying. My question to you is that, well, on one side there must have been some teachings. He learned something, he's a person who's attained a fair amount of knowledge. On the other side, his silence. How much are the actions of those people who he is not clearly controlling and not doing much about, how much are they perpetrated by the flow of funds? How much is this a franchise? Or is this really a franchise or an ideology? And I think we must ask ourselves the question, because there's too much of a misfit between the actions and what is indicated as an ideology.
Sure. Thank you, Ziad, for asking the easiest question on the world. I don't really get a chance to, in my first phase of dealing with the Grand Mufti, I was in sort of this shock that I had this access to him. And he was very hospitable and so forth. So I was, and I think I got more comfortable with him over the years. I never talked to him about the funding. I never talked about this. I learned of it through what they call as nazms, the people, the managers of these madrasas. And one person who's in charge of his particular madrasa in Banari town is Mufti Naeem. Mufti Naeem will tell you and be very transparent about where these funds come. At least that's what he says. Madrasas are like any other institutions. They live off endowments. And once they have any small endowment, they go for other endowments. And what that usually means is buying lots and lots of property. And when they find property and they hold property, then they have access to a lot of capital. I don't think the Grand Mufti will admit to how much of this ideology is stemming from this funding. And he just denies that a lot of it's coming under his watch. But he makes a clear distinction that TTP, Lashkar Taiba, and all these folks are not coming from him. Over and over again, Mufti Naeem, the Grand Mufti, and Maulana Tanvi Sahib in Lahore and so forth, tell him, show me one of our graduates and the latest bombings. Show me. There's not one graduate coming from our madrasas. There are bombings. They condemn it. The Ahmadiyya shootings in Lahore, the Rescue 15 in Lahore, the academies and so forth. They are not madrasa graduates, and they are so confident in that. And they say you can even find where they're coming from, but they're not our graduates. But they don't take the next step, which is what should we do with the next step? And they say we only are in charge of our graduates and our institutions, and our institutions are not part of that. That's what the standard response is.
In continuation with that, but not with the financing, having the position of the Grand Mufti, can you give any examples where he may have stepped forward to address or somehow alleviate some of the issues, social issues, for example, where he could use his position, give a fatwa in Pakistan, whether it is issues of zina, any other issues within society, where he brings this theory and his firm belief in social justice to fruition and makes a difference in the societal attitudes?
Thank you. I think that's a general question, is with the effectiveness of traditional documents, fatwas. He says from the beginning he condemns violence and condemns tyranny, condemns inequalities, and condemns all these other issues. But he says he's doing all that. He gives lectures, he gives fatwas on these. But if it's not heard, if it's not taken seriously, what can it be done? What can you do? And I also asked them, if fatwas is your main form of issuing your opinion, maybe there should be another mechanism that can be heard and be effective. And I remember he said, like what? And then I was put on the spot in front of his own students, like what? And I really didn't have any other suggestions other than saying, because they have a TV show program, and they have a newspaper, they have media, and they have all this stuff. And I said, maybe you need to learn some real skills of intervention. I mean, I didn't want to say it, but some of these names who are doing these awful things in the name of terrorism and so forth, they're in some of these people's Blackberries. You can call the head, and they're in the Blackberry. Hey, what are you doing? Why don't you really intervene? Why don't you have an intervention? What is the problem? And that's how I left it. I didn't want to get on his case on not doing enough. But I did try to show that there are alternative ways. And in order to intervene means you have to have some specific skills to be a mediator and really take control of certain of this conflict.
I was going to give you the social issue, gender equality, any of those issues where he sees his role or makes any intervention?
As far as my work, he's always said, we are equal but have different separate roles and so forth, and he's never come out on any other intervention other than saying that you should treat each other equally, be fair, and if your thoughts and actions are correct and aligned with God, then you should be acting as a dutiful Muslim. But he hasn't come out any other way. But they do have a charitable organization for orphans and things like that, and so that's one of the things they do. They always point to the charitable organizations.
First on this side and then on that side.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the speech. You mentioned the opinions of the three scholars in their fatwas, and they spoke a lot about how a lot of these groups got so involved in furthering their own political agendas that they lost sight of what it meant to be a real Muslim. I guess my question would be, then what does it mean to be a real Muslim? Because in a sense, I almost get the feeling that what's being promoted would be a more secular outlook on one's Islam, where you just kind of pray, you fast, but you don't really engage socially with society. Because over there, I would think that people feel quite passionately about different foreign policy issues that they see as being destabilizing forces in their own region. And to tell those people that they can't have feelings about them, that there's nothing that they can do towards alleviating those problems, I feel like maybe it's too romantic a notion. So what's something that I guess they could tell their own constituency, and what type of approach do they need to bring to the table to try to resolve that in a way that's not violent?
Sure. That's an excellent question. And I think the names I put out there are all, I think, agree that they're not saying you can't speak and you can't express your feelings. You can't express your disagreement or dissent on foreign policy or domestic policy. That's not their issue. But they do think that the tradition and the intellectual tradition, the spiritual tradition, the heritage of Islam doesn't make every Harry, Dick, or Sam or Muhammad, Fatima just get up, brush their teeth, and do suicide bombing because they think this is wrong. They do think that there are everyday nonviolent alternatives to resolving conflict. One of the things they realize, and I think they all have realized, is that there's very little understanding of how to assess a conflict. I mean, it's a whole discipline. In fact, here we're speaking at George Mason. George Mason has one of the most premier institutes in the world, called Institute of Conflict Assessment and Resolution. And it's a whole discipline where it offers a PhD, where understanding conflict and all its factors and all its variables, from socioeconomic, political, resources, and so forth, the history, the memory of trauma, and so forth, all impact how you understand conflict. And that, just to bring that within an Islamic framework, would be very helpful. Because for right now, those who are dissenting or disagreeing violently view the world as the good Muslims who are being oppressed by the bad Muslims, or the secular Muslims who are acting for the interest for the West, or the Israeli Zionists, or whoever they want to pick. And so the world is just now limited to the very faithful, few faithful. And what needs to be done, and I think especially Sheikh Tahir Qadri is realizing, he here has this massive network called Manhaj al-Qur'an in Pakistan, that they need to have more conflict assessment, conflict resolution, conflict transformation, conflict management, and peace building training seminars and academies, so it can be more used and more implemented. I think the more the framework you have, the better the assessment you'll have.
I would like you to clarify two things. One of them is that when you look into the situations in many of the Muslim countries, you don't have a peaceful way of opposing the social order, and like you have in the West, where you can oppose the government and you can change them. So how does this fact actually kind of make it very difficult for peaceful, the process, discourse of peace and peaceful resolution of conflict? How does it how is it affected by the fact that, people they don't really have the means by which they can actually voice their opposition to either the government or whatever social order they are facing. Then the second thing is that when we look into the literature of the Khawarij, it looks like it's tied to, the government and the public. So my question is this: how can we avoid the possibility that people label others as Kharijite just because they are not on their side, or they are not on the side of the government? Because much of the fatwas that have been issued labeling some people as Kharijite, rebellious, which is a kind of a technical term, kind of shows that most of these people are people that stand against the government in most cases. And how can we, resolve that? How is it possible that somebody could be a Kharijite without the factor of, trying to defend the government against those who oppose it?
Yeah, I'll try to respond. I think if you look at just one lens and say, oh, there's no political expression and there's not much political space to dissent or present opposing views, and because of that, Muslim societies don't have X, Y, Z, I would disagree if that's the only lens